Okay, so thank you all so much for coming to my third reading here at the Setback and Time Shop. Really excited that y'all are all here. So this reading is from the Tales of Harriford Grange, Volume 3, and it's the last one in the Tales of Harriford Grange series. It's called A Change of Heart. So I'm so excited to be here again. I'm so thankful to the staff here. Y'all are always so wonderful to have me come, and I really appreciate it. And I want to encourage anybody here to check out everything that they have out in the shop. It's locally made or locally created, and it's just a really neat little place to be. Okay, so this is the last in the Tales of Harriford Grange series, but I do plan to go back to Harriford Grange hopefully in the fall for another book and just be outside of this particular series. It just felt like it was time to kind of have 3 books and be done with this one. So I also have the first of my young adult sci-fi series coming out hopefully in July-ish. So really, really excited about that. It's the first novel that I've ever written. So it's about 3 times thicker than these books. And just super, super excited about that one. And then I wanted to tell you, it's got adventure, it's got science, a lot of science because I'm a science major and I love science. And it's also got a little bit of romance. Because a friend of mine who's also Ryan and I were talking, and we were like, we can't get away from romance. There's always romance in our book. So, Volume 3 is a little bit heavier than some of the other books, the other stories. The second book was a little heavier, but this one, when I was trying to choose a reading for it, it was a little difficult to pick like a span from like page A to page H that I want to do. So I'm going to jump a little bit from the scenes that I wanted to read. But basically, I'm going to give you an overview of the beginning of a relationship. So the first story is called Jules and Amelia, A Better Man, and it's a 2-part story. So I'm going to be sticking in the A Better Man section. And it's inspired by the Jules in it. It's inspired by Mr. Darcy, who, y'all know who Mr. Darcy is from Pride and Prejudice. Anyway, he's a very prideful, arrogant man, and I wanted to give somebody like that who has everything in the world, a woman who is exactly the opposite of everything he would have ever thought he needed and make her irresistible to him. Somebody he couldn't resist, who was completely wrong. So Amelia in the book has just gotten out of an abusive situation with her father, and so she's dealing with a lot of issues with that. She's very guarded against men. So she doesn't think very highly of herself, and she doesn't understand why Jules would be interested in her, because she sees him as this rich, wealthy man, and she's this poor girl. Obviously, that's kind of questionable, so why he would be interested in her from her point of view. So his job in this story is to make sure that she knows how valuable that she is, and she's supposed to show him what's really important in life. So is it important in life to have the riches and the fame and to have everything that you want, or is something else more important? And that's what she's going to teach him. So I think it's a very beautiful story from our point of view, and I hope that you enjoy it. Give a quick overview of the characters real quick. I told you about Jules and Amelia. I'm also going to mention Jules' sister. Her name is Mabel Ashcroft, and her name originally was more like Mabel or Mabel, but my computer keeps saying Mabel over and over, so it's stuck in my head. So her name is pronounced Mabel now, but you can pronounce it however you wish. Or Mabel, I think is prettier than Mabel, but And then you're also going to see Adelaide Mckinnon again, who's from the second book. She pops in with one of the scenes that I'm reading. And you'll hear Louisa Tiffany from the Farrier's Girl. And then the other character is Millie Young, who is the milliner. Millie is the nickname. So those are the characters you're going to meet. And the he that Amelia is referring to in this scene is Jules. So for reasons of writing, I didn't put his name at the beginning of the scene. So to make that clear. Right. Weak in the knees, Amelia sank onto the stool behind the counter. He'd looked at her, really looked, but he hadn't been pleased. His reddened face and diverted eyes spoke of embarrassment and distaste. Well, she thought, what did you expect? Amelia, dear, whatever's the matter? Asked Mrs. Young, bearing a biscuit and a cup of tea. Don't you let them rich folks make you think less of yourself. You're a pretty lass, same as her, just down on your luck. Far more than luck, Millie. Amelia dipped her biscuit in the warm tea and considered how unfair the world was. All she and Miss Ashcroft had done to reserve their respective lots was to be born. They had no say in their parents or circumstances. She knew she shouldn't be jealous, but she was. Her ladyship's not covered in scars and old clothes. It's not what's on the outside, but on the inside that matters, love. You've a heart of gold, and one of these days you'll meet a man who will see you for who you are. What worth was such a heart when no one could see past the surface? Thanks, Millie, but this time you've got it wrong. Mrs. Young didn't respond, and that suited Amelia fine. It simply proved she'd been right all along. If she was lucky enough to live that long, she'd die an old maid. On Monday, Millie took a buying trip to town, giving Amelia the day off. She was determined to make a fresh start. She rose at dawn and prepared a quick breakfast. She swept the ashes out of the fireplace and brushed out the chimney. Next, she stoked up a comfortable blaze and began tidying the hovel. She carried her father's things outside to give away or burn, scrubbed the walls, cleaned the windows, swept the floor, and dusted the few pieces of furniture, all the while singing at the top of her lungs. How freeing it was to be able to sing without reprimand. She set her wash to soak in the iron cauldron and grinned at her progress. Wrapping herself in her moth-eaten wool coat, she hauled her bed pallet outside to beat it out. She'd gotten in a few good whacks when she heard the sound of hoofs on the path near her rickety fence. Passers-by were so rare near her rural home, she hadn't even thought about modesty when she ventured out. Clutching her coat tightly, she started toward the door. Her foot slipped in the slushy snow, sending her sprawling on the ground. Never had she been so thankful for her mamma's old petticoat. If there was ever a time she wished for Jesus' coming, it was at that moment. She rose up to find herself face to face with Jules Ashcroft. His eyes were diverted, but it was his outstretched hand which sent her in a dither. I'm sorry for startling you, miss, he said. May I help you up? Speechless, she accepted his assistance. He let go as soon as she was firmly on 2 feet. She took a rapid evaluation, found herself unharmed and modest, but filthy, and wished she could disappear. Thank you, Mr. Ashcroft, she muttered. I'm not usually so clumsy. You're welcome, Miss Amelia Wren. His taken aback expression cued her to the fact he wasn't inquiring after her name. But to her astonishment, he amended his remark. Miss Wren, I hope you are unharmed. I am, sir, she replied, not daring to raise her eyes from the ground. He bowed slightly and leapt upon his horse, bidding her a swift good day. She watched him ride off into the distance with a sick feeling in her stomach. Going back to her pallet, she beat the tar out of it for good measure. The back door shut behind Mrs. Young. At the same moment, the front doorbell chimed. Amelia looked up at the customer with a short-lived smile. "Mr. Ashcroft!" she exclaimed, noting he was alone. He stared at her with a puzzled expression, perhaps wondering, as she was, what on earth he was doing there. She recovered her manners as quickly as possible and hastened to approach him. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, not looking him in the eye. "Mrs. Young has stepped out for a moment. May I be of assistance?" When he remained silent, she chanced eye contact. This seemed to rouse him. "Miss Wren, good morning, or good afternoon. I was in the neighborhood." "Indeed," she replied, wondering at his lack of composure. "Are you perchance in the market for a new hat? Mrs. Young has some dandy ones all the way from town." "A new hat," he repeated. "Why, yes, Miss Wren, lead the way." He followed her to the men's section of the store and examined some of the hats on display. She allowed her mind to absorb his handsome features and fancy clothes. She fingered the sleeve of her new second-hand dress, noting it failed miserably in comparison. "What do you think of this one?" he asked, trying on a bowler hat and making a comically serious face in the mirror. She couldn't contain her giggle. "If I may be so bold, I don't think it suits you, sir." Next, he tried on an exaggerated top hat. "And this one?" "No, sir. The one you arrived in is much more appropriate for you." His last try was a flat cap. Although it clashed horribly with his expensive suit, it brought out the richness of his dark brown eyes. He noticed her pause and turned toward her. "You like this one?" She pointed to her neck to indicate the ascot at his. "Not with that outfit, perhaps, but yes, I like it very much." To her shock, he removed his tie and full dress coat and unbuttoned his cotton shirt at the collar. "Is this better?" he asked, stepping toward her. The shimmery fabric of his maroon silk vest was still too ornate, but she nodded anyway. "It's a start." He slipped off the cap and handed it to her, their fingers brushing for an instant. He caught her gaze with his and winked. "I'll take it." "You will?" she gulped. "I mean, yes, of course, sir. May I help you find anything else?" To her surprise, he asked her to sit down. It defied convention, but she sank into a chair nonetheless. He sat in the one next to her and crossed his legs in a thoughtful way. "You're a Christian, yes?" he asked. "I am, sir." "When did you become a Christian?" "A couple of months ago," she replied, wondering where this was going. "After my father died, I needed work, and Mrs. Young took me in. She invited me to church and taught me the gospel." "My condolences about your father." "Thank you, sir." Jules started at Amelia's neutral tone. She's not sorry if he's dead, he realized. He traced the scars on her face with his eyes, now wondering at the cause of them. "He wasn't a good father?" he asked, forgetting his manners. It was ever so slight, but he couldn't mistake the shake of her head. When a tear rolled down her cheek, he whipped out his handkerchief and chided himself. "Please forgive me, Miss Wren, I was too forward." After she had dried her eyes, she looked with mortification upon his sumptuous cotton peace offering. "No, sir, I'm the one who should apologize. Look what I've done to your handkerchief." He laid his hand over it, realizing with confusion the spark which passed between them. "Don't worry about that. I have dozens more." Amelia's exquisite caramel eyes widened, trapping him. He willed himself to look past her scars to the young woman beyond and was startled by what he saw. Before he could be further captured, he let go of her hands and cleared his parched throat. "Excuse me. Do you mind my asking why you became a Christian?" Appearing equally flustered, she waited a moment before answering. "I want to go to heaven, so I needed to be saved from my sins. It was the only way, sir." "The only way," he repeated. "Why, yes, sir, the only way. Is it hard to live the Christian life?" "Sometimes, but Mr. Ashcroft, it is well worth the greatest sacrifice." He mulled over her answer. He'd seen the hovel where she lived, and the poor clothing she wore. What could she have sacrificed? As if Amelia had heard his thoughts, she continued, "If you choose to become a Christian, and I sincerely hope you do, your sacrifices might be different from mine. However, I can assure you it is a choice you will never regret." Mrs. Young returned at that moment and called out into the shop. Amelia answered before turning back to him. Without pausing to think, he reached for her hand and kissed it, drawing an astonished sigh from the lady. "Thank you, Miss Wren. You've been most helpful. I'll take that cap now." "Of course, Mr. Ashcroft," she replied, a rosy glow beautifying her face. "I'll ring you up at the counter." He left the shop in a whirl of questions. Did he have the courage to become a Christian? When did Miss Wren grow so lovely? And where was the tailor? He needed some new clothes to go with his brilliant new hat. Jules descended from his carriage outside of the McKinnon's large farmhouse, wondering again why Isabel had sent him there. He was anxious to get to the milliner's to pick up Amelia. He rapped on the door and was shown into a well-appointed foyer. Mrs. McKinnon hustled down the stairs, grinning wildly. "It won't be a moment, Mr. Ashcroft. Stay right where you are." He started to ask what was going on when his hostess looked up the staircase and gasped. He followed her line of sight until his eyes met with the familiar pair of caramel ones set into the well-dressed beauty hesitating at the top step. He must have successfully conveyed his approval as she smiled bashfully and began to descend. His gaze swept over her, enjoying each new find. Her hair shone with health and was put up in a very becoming style. Pale, clean skin glowed, each precious freckle taunting him. Her long-sleeved silk gown in a spring green was trimmed with ivory lace and ended in an ocean of ruffles. She was a lady, elegant and stunning. "I think we may have done too good of a job, Amelia," Adelaide chuckled. "I'm not so sure I should release you to this adoring gentleman." "I promise, madam," he said, planting a kiss on Amelia's hand. "I will behave myself and treat her with the honor she deserves." "Why don't I believe you?" Adelaide scowled playfully, hurrying them out the door. He helped Amelia into the carriage, following close behind, and called out the window to signal the driver. She adjusted her white fur wrap while casting him furtive glances in the dim light. "I must apologize, Mr. Ashcroft. Your sister, Mrs. Tiffany, Mrs. McKinnon, and even Mrs. Young got the ridiculous notion to give me a makeover." "Don't be sorry," he said, finding her hand. "You look beautiful this evening. I wish they had warned me, though. For once in my life, I'm severely underdressed." "I don't mind," she replied, fluttering her eyelashes timidly. The innocent gesture sent his heart galloping. "Where are we going tonight?" "The Heritage Inn restaurant," he whispered, tucking her arm in his. "And if you like, we could take an open-air ride through the countryside. The stars will be lovely this evening." "It sounds magical," she sighed dreamily. "Are you sure you want to waste such an evening with me?" "As long as I'm with you, Miss Wren, it's not a waste. Please believe that." So, if you want to find out what happens, you'll have to read the rest and what happens in between those things. So, I got a little tongue-tied on that last section. So, does anybody have any questions about anything related to writing?
What inspired you on this book?
This book, I go into a little more detail in the foreword of the book, but I decided I wanted to write a story of someone being converted from worldliness to Christianity, and somebody like Mr. Darcy, being taken from his very worldly life to something more spiritual and grounded. And also, in the second story, it's about an arranged marriage, and I really, really wanted to write about an arranged marriage, but those are kind of touchy. So I was really challenging myself to write about an arranged marriage in the best way I thought to write it. So,
how long did it take you to write this one?
I'm not really sure. I got the idea for The Doctor's Daughter in the first book, and then they just kind of tumbled out in succession. So I wrote all of these three pretty quickly. I didn't actually finish the second one, the Mabel and Percy Mabel. I had like the last scene left, the epilogue that I hadn't written, because we were dealing with infertility, and I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to go at the end of the scene. So I feel like waiting to do it, now that we have our daughter, made it super special to get to do the epilogue in that one. So I'm really happy that I waited. But I think overall, just a few months, just because they just kind of happened. So I'm pretty happy.
Well, thank you for sharing your words.
Thank y'all for having me. So, y'all have any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and really enjoyed having this opportunity